Hey guys, it's a spicy cetacean. Welcome back to my channel. We're going to go over the next two segments of Kent Hovind and Dr. Hugh Ross and the debate that they were having on the John Engelberg show. I got 2 out of 3 of the names. Anyway, last time we watched the first 2 segments, we'll watch the next 2, and then there's 2 more after that, and we'll look at the body language, reaction style. I don't have lunch this time, but I do have juice, grape juice, in my mug. I'm not monetized, it's fine. Yep, that's good grape juice. All right, I'm gonna switch over. Nope, wrong button. There we go. Maybe. That's the one. Okie doke. So here we go. Same deal as last time. I have technically watched this before, but it's been several weeks ago at this point. So I'm going to reaction style, start and stop. I am waiting for a phone call, or I'd put it on Do Not Disturb. So we're going to watch, get your sustenance. I mean, these aren't as far as Kent Hovind goes, this is pretty typical in terms of him spouting off his creationist beliefs. It's a little bit less of the really mean stuff. A lot of his more recent stuff is really, really just mean and nasty. And I'll get to that eventually. The cat is scratching the stairs. Anyway, I will get to that eventually. I'm just not in a headspace to handle that right now. Yeah, there was some good body language I saw from some other content creators that Kent had recently that we can dive into. For now, though, we're just going to stick with the creationist, old Earth creationist and new Earth creationist debate, Kent and Dr. Ross, and we'll keep going with that because it's a little bit easier on my mental health to deal with that, especially when I have grape juice. So let's go.
We're talking with Dr. Hugh Ross, who received his PhD in astronomy from the University of Toronto and did postdoctoral research on quasar at Caltech, and Dr. Kent Hovind, who received his PhD in education, writing his doctoral dissertation on the subject of creation versus evolution. Our topic is, are the universe and the Earth billions of years...
I just want to say, I don't miss standard def television at all. At all. Like, even my webcam, this isn't my webcam, this is a DSLR that I happen to have, but even my webcam is has more definition than this. I mean, it's standard def on videotape on YouTube. Oh my gosh, no.
...years old, or just thousands of years old? Are Genesis 1 and 2 compatible with contemporary scientific evidence? Should they be? And that's a good question too, but we're going to go down using chapter 1 of Genesis, because a lot of folks have kind of discarded this, and I thought let's have our scientists, let's actually comment on...
Kent's not a scientist. Dr. Ross is a scientist. Kent is not a scientist.
...what these verses are talking about. We hit day 1 last time. We're going to talk about day 2, Genesis 1, 6 through 8, and says, "And God said, let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so. God called the expanse sky. And there was evening and there was morning the 2nd day." Hugh, what happened on day 2?
Well, hopefully we agree here. I mean, I see that as a reference to God establishing a stable, abundant water cycle. In fact, one of our colleagues, Dr. Robert Newman, who's both an astronomer and a theologian, wrote his master's thesis in theology on that very point. Careful exegesis of the words reveals that it's speaking about God setting up an abundance of water in the atmosphere, the troposphere more correctly, water in the ocean, and you got a cycling which is going to make possible sufficient water in the future continental land masses.
All right.
I want to say, I mentioned this last time, but what Dr. Ross is doing here with his hands is steepling. And it is an indicator that he is confident in what he's saying. It doesn't come across to audiences as very likable because of things like Mr. Burns and excellent, but it isn't necessarily an indicator that he thinks he's better than everybody else. It is a more common indicator for him to just that he's very confident in what he's saying. And I mean, he's citing his sources, he's illustrating with his hands a little bit, he's still a little reserved, but I mean, overall, like, what he's saying is rock solid versus what Kent, I'm sure, is going to tell us in a second.
Kurt, Kent?
Well, if God set up the water cycle then, why did it say later it had not rained upon the earth? What you're saying is this: had it rained upon the earth for millions of years, was there a normal water cycle before? Is this all in day 2?
Definitely.
Well,
The finger, we saw this twice in the last video. The finger on the mouth is, for him, I think in this situation, kind of more of like a, I think we said he was trying to, it's almost like pinpointing a gotcha. I'm trying to think of like other times that I've seen other people do this, but it's not a normal Kent Hovind. It's not in his baseline, basically. Like, he is trying to get Dr. Ross into like some sort of verbal trap. And just for reference, again, Kent is a King James onlyist, which means he thinks that the King James version is the end-all be-all of the Bible. And John Ankerberg said in our last video that he is reading from NIV. So I think Kent gets hung up on semantics because he is a literalist. And I think that's where a lot of his arguments come from, is just a lack of nuance and taking everything literally and just standing ground on semantics, where life isn't like that. So I think that's where most of this is coming from. But he is like, it's condescending when he does that. I don't like it.
the Bible says very clearly it had not rained upon the earth.
No, you're quoting from Genesis chapter 2.
It says, a mist went forth and watered the face of the ground because it had not rained upon the earth.
Yeah, but it's in the same context that there is no man, no plant. I mean, it's simply a restatement of the initial conditions you've got there in Genesis 1. I mean, what you have in Genesis 2 is a second account of creation with a focus on human beings.
The second account of creation focusing on day 6.
Yes.
All of chapter 2, except for the first 4 verses, is dealing with what happened in the garden only, and only on day 6. It's not talking about...
But you're quoting verses 5 and 6 out of Genesis 2, and it's simply establishing the context for God creating Adam and placing him in the Garden of Eden and later creating Eve. It doesn't give you an ordered list.
How much later did he create Eve? Was it the same day?
The same 6th day.
I want to go back there for Kent. So this is why I like watching other creationists with him, because they know the Bible and they're also contextualizing and they're explaining the contextualizing. So that's what I love about Dr. Ross here is, and I mean, disclaimer, I'm not a biblical literalist. I'm not a creationist, like evolution, science, abiogenesis, Big Bang, all that for me. But looking at Kent facing someone who knows the Bible equally, if not better than him, is just fantastic. I love it. But watch Kent's face. He's got an eyebrow.
How much later did he create
here.
Eve? Was it the same day?
Yeah, like it was really, really subtle. I need to get a better playback program so I can go slower on it. But like
Later did he create Eve? Was it the same day?
that little flash right there, it was asymmetrical. So one side does go up, but the other side goes up higher, and that is really an indicator of, like, anything asymmetrical is, it has a negative connotation to it usually, whether that is a disgust or a sneer or something. Like, usually it's we don't like it, and I think for Kent in this context, he's not clearly he's not agreeing with what Dr. Ross is saying, but like he's unhappy with the way that this has started off already.
Same 6th day, correct, which was a long period of time.
Which was a long period of time.
Right.
Okay, this is where you got to make sure I understand what you really mean
Sure.
by what you say, because I've read enough of your stuff to know to check that out.
He throws these little digs in there, and that is one thing that's so irritating about him, because you can't address the dig without looking like the defensive jerk. It's a really dishonest way of debating and having a discussion, because it's just, and his stuff here, this exaggerated eye flash, it's hard to tell if this is an asymmetrical brow raise again because of just the angle and stuff like that, but the exaggerated facial features he does when he's performing, it's performative. It's not as much of a leak of information as some of his other smaller gestures. So here, this is very intentional and less of a leak.
I understand what you really mean by what you say, because I've read enough of your stuff to know to check that out.
Okay.
So you think Adam was there for a long time by himself? You say he had to recover from surgery and had to go to college for a semester and learn?
He had to name all the animals.
And that took a long time.
He had to work the Garden of Eden, correct.
Well, let's go back to day 3. We're going to get to that, all right?
So interestingly, Kent is steepling here. I didn't catch that before, but look. Let's go back. Yeah. Kent is steepling. So in contrast with the way that Dr. Ross steeples, which is up, Kent's is down. And that's interesting to me for a couple of reasons. One, he's mirroring. Because Dr. Ross does this, he's mirroring Dr. Ross. And a lot of times humans do that instinctively as a way to show that we're engaged. It's also helps with likability. And what I'm not sure with Kent, though, because I have my suspicions on whether or not, and we'll get into this in later videos, but I have a suspicion that if he's not a psychopath, he's really close to it, because of, again, a lot of reasons. This is my opinion. I represent only myself. I'm a talking head on YouTube. I have 0 qualifications. I think he's a psychopath because we've seen in a lot of his videos just a sheer lack of empathy, and also his emotions are weird. And what I mean by that is they don't necessarily match the situation he's in. And something that psychopaths are really good at is mimicking behavior. They mimic things that they think they're supposed to be doing. And so when Kent is mirroring Dr. Ross here, Dr. Ross is very confident. And so I think in order to project confidence, Kent is mirroring what Dr. Ross does to also project confidence, except the things that he's saying he's not as confident in them because he doesn't get to have his slides up so that he can gish gallop over Dr. Ross. He doesn't have control over the format, which he likes to have. And there's also just, I don't know. We see him, so when we see him looking up a lot, he's trying to retrieve information from his brain. And we know from other videos, his brain is in PowerPoint. That's where all of his information is. So he kind of transfers that knowledge to the computer, and then all he has to remember is where to find that information. He can't do that here, which means he's less comfortable. And that's why when Dr. Ross steeples, it's up like this, but Kent's is more down, which is kind of, it's almost like a gauge. So like if straight up is super confident, down is like medium. He's way less confident about what's being said. No, well, not just what's being said, but like, because he hears Dr. Ross, and I'm sure he's heard those arguments a bunch from other creationists, but he's less confident in his stance, in his points that he's going to make. So I like that a lot.
Correct.
Well, let's go back to day 3. We're going to get to that, all right? What happened with Adam and Eve, but let's keep it in context because our folks out here are trying to follow.
Context.
So the fact is basically day 2, we had what happen?
Water cycle.
Water cycle.
I disagree. I think on day 2 we had a firmament established, which is clearly later spelled out in Genesis 1:20 as being the place where the birds fly. Genesis 1:20 says the birds fly in the firmament of heaven. So that's the atmosphere. It says there was water above this atmosphere. That's what it says very clearly. And then also...
Water. Ooh, that was a good, I don't know if you guys can see it. Watch Kent's hands.
So that's the atmosphere. It says there was water above this atmosphere. That's what it says very clearly. And then...
He fiddles with his wedding ring. That is not in his baseline. This goes back to the steepling. It's a self-soothing type of gesture. A lot of times folks who have rings will play with their rings in a manner of self-soothing. So he's trying to get that nervous energy out, and it's coming out in things like the self-soothing with the wedding ring. That's interesting. I didn't catch that one before. So again, he is not happy with the way that this is going. He probably didn't like being interrupted by John Ankerberg. Yeah, I like seeing him uncomfortable.
Also in Psalm 148, verse 4, it says there are still waters above the heavens.
Waters.
Suspect God made 3 heavens. First heaven is the atmosphere where the birds fly. The second heaven is where the stars are. We call it outer space, sun, moon, and stars. The third heaven is where God lives. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, the Apostle Paul tells about being caught up to the third heaven. And
Dr. Ross is just blinking nonstop. So folks, everybody's got their own blink rate or amount that they blink, as a baseline. And then that can change as we're stressed out or happy or concentrating on something. So I think Dr. Ross blinking here is just like, what the F? Oh.
Apparently there was a water barrier between each of those. The first one is probably now gone. That's what fell down at the flood. I don't know if it was ice or water or moisture or what.
But wouldn't it fall down immediately? What's going to hold it up there?
If I read your book and you make what's called a straw man argument.
He's mansplaining. I mean, it's not mansplaining, but he's condescendingly trying to tell Dr. Ross that he did a straw man, which I don't know what fallacy this is. I'll pop it up later. But it might be the fallacy, because he's calling out a fallacy and then just disregarding everything around it because he thinks it's a fallacy.
Assume that all the water for the flood came from this canopy.
Even if some of it just came from the canopy,
there's water
still
up in the
got a
sky
problem.
right now.
Yeah, but I mean...
There's plenty of it.
Okay.
Clouds are water, they float just...
Super smug smile right there. And just, this is like... It's interesting that he leans towards Dr. Ross here. Again, I think it's condescension because of how he's explaining this. And it's just like hey, you said this, but it's not accurate. And I'm going to tell you why it's not accurate. And Dr. Ross is not having any of it. He's got his legs crossed. He's got his arms in the protective posture, protective gesture. He is just not having any of Kent. And his non-reaction, I don't think Kent knows what to do with, because he's not riling Dr. Ross up in the way that when he debates folks who are pro-evolution, they get riled up and angry because Kent is just spouting off nonsense. But Dr. Ross is just not having it.
You assume that all the water for the...
he played with his jacket button there. Did you catch that? Watch his right hand, not the hand that's up. That's a misdirection.
What's called a straw man argument. You assume that all the water for the flood came from this canopy.
Even if some of it just came from the
canopy,
canopy,
there's water
still
up in the
got a
sky
problem.
right now.
Watch the smile.
Yeah, but I mean...
There's plenty of it.
Okay.
Clouds are water, they float just fine.
Very, very smug face there.
I don't know
so
what
you
held
don't
it up.
believe there's any more water up there before the flood than after the flood?
I think there was somehow a canopy of water suspended up there. I can't prove this. This is the canopy
Any
theory.
different than what we have right now?
Oh, probably so. I think that
Then it's got to come down.
it did come down. It rained 40 days and 40
It will
nights.
come down immediately. It wouldn't wait. I mean, the law of gravity is either going to dissipate it to outer space or bring it crashing to the Earth.
There's plenty of water out there in the atmosphere right now.
But there's a limit to how much it can hold.
I agree. And it was right at that limit.
Which
Most
isn't
of
very
the,
much.
I don't know that. And you don't either know what it was.
Yes, I do.
No,
I'm
you
an
don't.
atmospheric.
The
I've
Bible
taken
says,
atmospheric physics.
the Bible says very clearly that most of the water for the flood came from inside the earth. When the crust of the earth broke open, the fountains of the deep broke open. That's where the vast majority came from.
Yeah.
And I think we still today have the scars where this happened. They're called fault lines. You know, San Andreas Fault, the Hayward Fault, New Madrid Fault. And I've studied all those. None of them are my fault, but I've studied them. And I think that the flood in the days of Noah.
I love how much bigger of a laugh Dr. Ross got than Kent got there. So Dr. Ross got a laugh, and now Kent has to get one, and he doesn't get nearly the same amount.
Happened when this water came out from inside the earth and the canopy collapsed, which is one of the explanations.
Let me move you on, because you're going to get into it in the day 3 here as well.
Okay.
Let's just roll over into it. This is what happened on day 3. God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear. And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. God saw that it was good. There was evening, there was morning, the 3rd day. We have the receding of the waters of the oceans, seas, and lakes taking place. We have the emergence of land above the seas taking place. Plants and trees come forth at that point.
Dr. Ross is fiddling with his thumbs a little bit here. So it's similar to that self-soothe
We have the
gesture.
receding of the waters of the oceans, seas, and lakes taking place. We have the emergence of land above the seas taking place. Plants and trees come forth at that point.
So very similar to Kent's playing with the wedding ring. It's a self-soothing gesture. It's getting energy out. It is keeping you focused in some cases. So similar with my fidgeting in my pen, which I still don't have. Oh well. I have grape juice.
What else do you guys see taking place, and how long was this going on?
It took one day, 24 hours.
Well, I would see it as taking a much longer period of time.
How long?
Huh?
How long?
Oh, probably in the order of a few 100 million years. I mean, you're going to get these continents formed.
Oh, he did not like that answer at all. First of all, he interrupts Dr. Ross, which he doesn't like having happen to him. Second of all, oh, that lip pursing and that lip licking there. Oh, he did not. First of all, fixing the jacket. So again, that is not part of his baseline. I mean, it could be part of a sitting down baseline, but I really don't think it is. I think it's a grooming, protective type gesture.
How long?
Oh, probably in the order of a few 100 million years. I mean, you're going to get these continents
Lip
forming,
purse
right?
and a licky.
The continents we have today?
Yeah.
No. The continents today are a result of Noah's flood. The shapes of today's.
That's 6,000 miles of plate tectonics in just a few months of time.
That is assuming, of course, that today's continents are like they were in the days of Adam and Eve. See, what you've done is you've taken some scriptures that clearly apply to the flood, the worldwide flood in the days of Noah.
Do you believe that tectonics is operable in the Earth?
I was just on the San Andreas Fault last week. Yeah, it's moving.
Okay.
Sure. That's a result of the flood 4,400 years ago.
Just because you were there doesn't mean that you know anything about it. The San Andreas Fault, isn't that the one in San Francisco? I'm going to Google this really quick. Like, is this the one that's above? Where is it? Yeah, it's a fault in California. Okay, so like, just because you were there doesn't mean that you know anything about it. Physically being in a place doesn't automatically give you any knowledge. I can go to Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia, and it doesn't mean that I know anything about the Founding Fathers just because I'm there. I could go to Texas. It doesn't mean I know anything about guns or oil or whatever's in Armadillos with leprosy being there doesn't actually give you any credentials at all. He's not a geologist. He's not a scientist. He doesn't have a real doctorate. You can't feel the San Andreas Fault moving unless you were there during an earthquake. Kent.
The plates are still moving. The fountains of the deep broke open. The water came to the surface. They're still settling and shifting. I've climbed 40 volcanoes, taught earth science for years. Yes, sir.
But if you squish that much tectonics in that brief of a period of time...
How much tectonics? What are you trying to do? You're trying to put Africa and South America together? Is that what you're judging this by?
Either that or just produce the mountains that are necessary for your flood interpretation.
In order to make Africa and South America fit for the Pangea theory they put in the textbooks, they shrank Africa 30 to 5.
Notice how he went to the textbook definition and completely ignores the second offer that Dr. Ross gives, which is, he's like, even just the mountain ranges that you need for the flood theory. He can't refute that, so he's going to the other thing that he thinks he can refute, and is going to what's in the textbooks, because that's his comfort zone for arguments and debate.
35 to 40%. Pangea theory is just pure baloney. Plus, if you look...
Have you checked that out with geophysicists?
Well, just let me finish.
No,
if you take the water...
This is important.
Well,
if you're going to make these statements, at the very least you got to do...
Always check it out.
...is go to the geophysicists and say, give me your feedback. Have you talked to them?
I taught earth science for 15 years.
No, that's a no. He did not go to any geophysicists and confirm any of his information. He's relying on the fact that he taught for several years at a private school, which wasn't necessarily going to have any curriculum requirements or oversight even. And in the 80s or 90s, like at this point, he hadn't been teaching for a while. And so he's out of the loop on stuff. And we already know he doesn't like to get new information at all ever. So yeah, that's key right there. He said, have you checked it out? And kudos for Dr. Ross for saying, no, this is important. You have to get it checked out.
At the very least you got to do...
Always check it out.
...is go to the geophysicists and say, give me your feedback.
He's interrupting Dr. Ross here because he doesn't want Dr. Ross to finish, and he just wants to get past it and get back to his argument.
Have you talked to them?
I taught earth science for 15 years. Get any high school textbook, which is what I taught. Measure the size of the continents they show for Pangea. Get a ratio, and then go measure it on a real globe. And you'll say, wow, how did they do that? Plus, all of
Every map is wrong. Some maps are better than others. Quote Forrest Valkai there. He is an excellent evolutionary biologist on YouTube. Love his content. Go check out his content. Every map is wrong. Some maps are more helpful. There are maps that I'm US based, so all of my maps are US focused. If you compare old maps or maps where like they want to get all of the United States, and so they put Alaska and Hawaii down in the corner, and so they make it look like Alaska is only slightly bigger than Hawaii and roughly the size of Texas, whereas in actuality, Alaska is the size of half the continental United States in terms of, square mileage. Kent is taking maps literally where he shouldn't take maps literally. And that is frustrating. And yes, they should be on a globe. He's not a flat earther, surprisingly. He actually hates flat earthers. Irony. Any map of Pangea is going to be an estimated guess. It's not going to be perfect because nobody was around for Pangea to map it out. We didn't have cartographers back then. Nuance and context completely ignored by Kent. I don't want to say lost on Kent because I think he's aware of it. I'm going to say ignored because if he ignores it, he can continue with his fallacious arguments.
Mexico, all of Central America is gone. They take them out. The shapes of the continents is a pure coincidence based on the water level. If you take the water out of the oceans, you will notice there is dirt underneath. These continents are not floating around like lily pads in a bathtub. They're connected. It's just the low places happen to be full of water. The opposite sides of most rivers are parallel with each other. That doesn't mean they broke apart millions of years ago. It's just a low place full of water.
Well, that's
all.
you stating it. I mean, again, check with the community of geophysicists and get their feedback.
About what?
About your...
Everything you just said, Kent. God. About what? Look at Dr. Ross. He's leaning forward. I'm getting more heated. I kudos to Dr. Ross for keeping his shit together, because there's no way I could have.
Plate tectonics theory. Is there
I agree.
any scientific support for your plate tectonics theory?
I agree. The continents are moving.
He asked a direct question. Is there scientific support for your plate tectonics theory? And Kent completely didn't answer and went off to something else because he doesn't have an answer, because he doesn't have scientific support.
A little bit.
A little bit.
That doesn't prove they're moving about as fast as your fingernails grow.
That part I'm pretty sure is true.
A professor of that subject that I know of would say about as fast as your fingernails grow. Obviously, that doesn't prove they've always been moving at that rate. And just because South America and Africa are X number of miles apart, you're just judging by the water level.
Take
the water out and they're touching.
To me, Paul says everything must be tested. If you're going to...
So I want to address this right here. This move right here specifically is what got me into body language to begin with, because certain politicians in the United States, my grape juice is getting to me already. I hate this. So this is, it's a cherry picking. It's a trying to make a specific point. You're going from a lot of things down to one. It has its place, and I think open or closed, I'm not sure if there's really a difference. Personally, for me, I just don't like it. That's my personal preference. It doesn't automatically have negative connotations. It's only that in me personally, in the experiences that I've had, it hasn't been used positively. But that doesn't mean that it's bad. Kent has used it. Dr. Ross has used it. Lots of people use it. I'm just not, I would much rather, I think I'm more of a closed hand cherry pick person, if I even go that far. I'd have to go back and watch my own videos. I'm watching myself on the screen while I do this. It's really hard not to, sorry. So they both do it. It doesn't have an automatic negative context. The implication, it suggests that you're trying to make a specific point. You can also do this with actually pointing, or with, you're counting off one thing. Stuff like that. It's a physical kind of emphasis. So whereas if we were writing something, we might bold or underline it, or put it in italicize it. That's the word. Here, because we're getting across verbal and visual messaging, the way to emphasize is with body language and indicators. So really, Dr. Ross is just trying to hammer his point home here, where he's citing Paul.
Claim that plate tectonics was millions of times faster than the days of Noah.
I didn't claim that. Don't put those words in my mouth. No, I didn't say that either.
Hundreds?
All I said was...
No, he literally didn't say those words, but that is the implications he's making when he said what he said. And that is where he kind of gets to wriggle out of things, is by saying, I didn't say that. You implied it though. And that's where people take issue.
The shapes of the continents...
So here Kent is making the single point with one hand, and now he's open.
...only appear to fit because of the water level. Yes, the continents are moving, but they've only been moving 4,400 years since the flood of the days of Noah.
How about during the flood?
I don't know. The Bible says the fountains of the deep were broken open. There was probably some incredible continental movement during that flood. And
I don't know, but probably. See, you're implying things. And that is why people think you say things that you're claiming never came out of your mouth.
how you can teach it was a local flood, I don't understand that. I mean, why would God tell Noah to build a boat, fill it full of animals, stay in there for a year? Tell Noah to move.
Also, Dr. Ross didn't claim it was a local flood. That's a weird implication that Kent just... I mean, it's not weird. It's part of one of his normal talking points.
Figure that out. It was a worldwide flood.
That laugh is because he is trying to relieve some of the tension that he's feeling. When we smile, when we laugh, we're trying to get whoever is watching us are receptive, like the people who are getting the messages that we're sending out with our words, with our body language. We're trying to get them to do it back to us because we feel tense or because we need reassurance. So he is looking for reassurance right there with that laugh. And I think it's hysterical because Dr. Ross is not given any.
He could have told him to move, but the main purpose here is that God set up Noah to be a prophet. It says, build this gigantic boat in the desert and preach to this wicked generation. If he had moved, he would have lost his opportunity to preach.
Do you really believe that?
Yes, it says so in Hebrews and Peter.
So the purpose of this ark was just to get attention. It was a
God always gives
hamburger
his
Sunday to bring all the kids in.
a pulpit.
A hamburger Sunday? What?
Opportunity to preach.
Do you really believe that?
Yes, it says so in Hebrews and Peter.
So the purpose of this ark was just to get attention. It was a
God always gives
hamburger
his
Sunday to bring all the kids in.
What?
Pulpit.
All right, we got to get to that too, but gee, we got to get through the 7 days here. Can I move on to day 4 because this gets us into the light again? God said.
So if you've watched any of Kent's more recent debates, he likes using the channel Standing for Truth because Standing for Truth, their moderators don't jump in and refocus the conversation in ways like John Ankerberg does. And Kent interprets this because Kent is the one getting it off track. He sees that redirection to get back on track as a personal attack to him. And that's why he doesn't like that.
This is day 4. Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening, there was morning, the 4th day. Question: did God make the sun? Did God make the stars on day 4? Hugh?
I'd say no. It's in the cal-perfect form, which means that they were formed either on the 4th day, the 3rd day, the 2nd day, the 1st day, or in the beginning. Go back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the Shamayana rest. That includes all the matter, energy, space, and time, stars, and galaxies. So that's when the light was, that's when the stars existed. And what you see there in the text is these are to serve for signs for the animals that are going to be created in the 5th and 6th days. You'll note that all the animals mentioned in the 5th and 6th days are sufficiently complex. They need at least the occasional visibility of the sun, moon, and stars to regulate their biological clocks.
Interesting kind of emphasis there, going from here to here, which is a little bit more relaxed. Like he's not clenching really tight. His hands are a little bit open in that steeple there, but emphasizing with one finger in that. I think that's really interesting. I don't think we've seen that from him in this debate.
This is one that I actually looked it up, and the Hebrew verb is wayas in verse 16, and according to Archer again, God had made the 2 great luminaries. This should be, Hebrew had no special form for the pluperfect tense, but uses the perfect tense, or the conversive imperfect is here to express either the English past or the English perfect. So what he's saying is God had made 2 great lights to
This pose, so Kent hasn't moved. I would venture to guess that he is not concentrating on what John Ankerberg is saying and more trying to think of how he's approaching this. I don't get the sense that he's actively listening, because in contrast, Dr. Ross has moved his steeple up and he's leaning forward a little bit. So he's actively engaged in what John Ankerberg is saying, whereas Kent is like staring off into the distance, just sitting there, not doing anything.
So that seems to open the door that the sun and so on were already there. But it does say he also made the stars. Did he make stars on day 4 and didn't make them at the beginning?
Well, it's in the same cal-perfect form, which means it could have been made any time in the past.
Okay,
third,
so he
second, first
also
day
had
are in the
made the
beginning.
stars.
Right.
Kent?
Well, I don't know Gleason Archer, and I know that an awful lot of the people in the past, Schofield and Dakes for the Dake Study Bible, were products of their time. They were trying very hard to make the Bible say the earth is millions of years old because of in the early 1800s, some people started teaching the earth.
This is not an answer to the question at all, because the topic, and this is why Kent thinks he's being attacked when really all that the moderator is doing is bringing the conversation back to the topic that's being presented. He's not answering the question. He's jumping into why his version of the Bible is the only version that anybody should be looking at. And TLDR, the answer is racism.
Earth is millions of years old. Christians panicked and thought, wow, they're going to prove the Bible's wrong. We've got to somehow make the Bible say this. And so in the early 1800s, you see the gap theory, the day-age theory, progressive creation, lots of these theories, which are just compromises. The earth is not millions of years old, for one thing. And why on earth should we
The question wasn't whether or not the earth was millions of years old. It's did God create the stars on that day or something?
compromise a perfectly good Bible, which has never been proven wrong, with a
It's been proven wrong a lot. Kent just doesn't accept the evidence.
dumb theory of evolution, which has never been proven right?
It's been proven right a lot. He doesn't accept the evidence.
It's not evolution.
Okay, your theory of Big Bang is exactly like Carl Sagan's.
No, it isn't.
Well, tell me the difference.
Okay, the difference is this. Carl Sagan doesn't perceive design in the Big Bang. We do. In fact, we stipulate that the greatest scientific evidence for design in creation is in the Big Bang characteristics.
Isn't that the opposite, though, of the second law of thermodynamics?
Well, of course, we have God creating the universe. He's
Why
setting
not?
up the physics of the universe.
Why not do it in 6 days like he said?
Now, he did do it in 6 days, like he said.
Why
Six
not?
literal long periods of time.
6 literal long periods of time.
Yes.
So here you have day 3, the plants living for millions of years without a clearly visible sun.
I'm saying the sun was always there. What was going on is
What's interesting to me about that hand gesture, so when Kent is talking to the audience or to John Ankerberg, his hands and his fingers are pretty open. But when he's talking to Dr. Ross, at least here, let's see if I can stop right on it. There. His fingers are closed and his hand is cupped. So this is almost like a wall. Like he's putting a wall between himself and Dr. Ross. And I find that very interesting. So like he doesn't want to be open with Dr. Ross because that feels too vulnerable. So he puts his fingers up in like a wall.
sun was always there. What was going on is the atmosphere from day 1 to day 4 was translucent. Light was coming through, but the observer on the surface of the earth, the Spirit of God is brooding over the surface of the waters. From that perspective, he couldn't make out the distinction of the sun, moon, and stars, only the light. It's like where I was raised in British Columbia. We got to see the sun maybe 2 days out of the year because the rest of the time it's overcast. What you got going on before the 4th day is where it's overcast all the time. 4th day, we have the atmosphere becoming transparent for the first time, and now we can have God creating creatures that need these things for signs to regulate their clocks.
Kent just sits there. So he reminds me of, okay, this is going to date me, and I'm going to show also my basic girl status. It reminds me in Twilight where after Bella gets turned into a vampire, the Cullen family is like, no, you have to do all these little things in order to fit in, even though you don't have to do it, even though you don't have to shift in your seat, even though you don't have to take a breath. Like, you have to, while you're engaging with the humans, you have to do all these little tiny human movements. That's what Kent is doing. So, like, he gives, like, one nod because he sees other people nodding when other people are talking. So this is an observed behavior. It's not a behavior he does instinctively. And again, he is just waiting for his turn to talk. He's not actually interested in hearing anything that Dr. Ross has to say. He's just waiting for his turn to talk. And again, it's been weeks since I've seen this, but I can almost guarantee you that this doesn't actually answer the question. Let me go back a couple of seconds.
Sun, moon, and stars, only the light. It's like where I was raised in British Columbia. We got to see the sun maybe 2 days out of the year because the rest of the time it's overcast. What you got going on before the 4th day is where it's overcast all the time. Fourth day, we have the atmosphere becoming transparent for the first time, and now we can have God creating creatures that need these things for signs to regulate their clocks.
Okay, I disagree. You're saying that the sun and moon were created. The word created and made are used interchangeably all through the scripture. I've got a list of about, I don't know, 50 or 60 places where they're used interchangeably. It means the same thing. He created and made.
Scholars don't agree with that.
Well,
there is a distinction between a saw.
Smug smile there again, and again with the closed hand, whereas Dr. Ross is trying to make a specific point. Dr. Ross's hand is up here because he is done with this conversation. Because I'm going to listen, but I don't have the energy to even hold my head up myself anymore, right? And I'm not saying that's what he thinks, but when I do that, it's because really, this is what you're going to go with?
And bara means you're talking about something that's really brand new. When the text uses the verb asa, it doesn't necessarily have to be brand new, but it does have to be something that's designed or manufactured by the Creator. And I'm conceding that point. I believe that the Big Bang, the universe, the Earth, the solar system, our galaxy, were all very carefully fine-tuned and engineered by the Creator.
Well,
that's where I differ from Carl Sagan.
This brings up a great concern for me. After reading lots and lots of your material, I really feel like I'm talking to a Mormon priest, like you have a different God. It's not the same God.
Why do you say that?
Kent started off this debate in the last video. He started off this debate saying, the God that I worship. So Kent started this off making a distinction between his God and whatever other God they were going to talk about in this conversation. And yet, here he is saying, it sounds like you're talking about a different God. This tactic, it's a form of projection, and the whole point of it is to call it out before it can be used against him. So he's going to accuse Dr. Ross of doing this when it's really what he's doing. So that if Dr. Ross decides to call him out on it, it looks like Dr. Ross is just saying, no, you are. This is a really common tactic that Kent uses. He tells on himself a lot with his projections, and it's kind of hilarious, actually. There will be other videos. Maybe I'll do a Kent tells on himself video. That would be fun. But in this case, Kent is saying, it sounds like you're talking about another God, because in his mind, he thinks he's talking about another God, and he wants to make that claim first.
Well, the Mormons will tell you they love God. Okay, who do you mean?
Yeah, but the fact is he's saying, Mormons are saying there's many gods. Okay, you can become a god, example. I can become a god. Bible's not.
To me, that's a bad example. You brought up the Mormons, Kent. Are you saying your example was bad, or are you just saying it's bad now that you've been called out on it? I think it's because you've been called out.
I'm not saying that. I don't hear Hugh saying that. Are you saying that?
Well, no. The God that I worship not only made it in 6 literal 24-hour days, he's not deceitful. We don't have to wait for somebody to come along in the 20th century to explain it to us.
Let's talk about deceitfulness. Let's talk about that point. The fact is, that which is there, when the scientists find it, if it's not true, wouldn't that be deceitful?
Oh, yes.
Right.
And there's no conflict between the Bible and science. There's a conflict between the Bible and the Big Bang.
No,
and
but
there's
I'm
a
saying
conflict
is
between
the
the Bible
fact
and
is,
evolution.
take the very thought of the fact of the light coming from the stars.
Sure.
Okay? We got to talk about this. We'll do it in another program because we've got to shut this one down. But the fact is that if the light is not what the scientists are saying that it did from all the measurements, then God had to create it in transit. Therefore, it's not really true.
No, that's a false assumption. You're setting up a straw man here. If the stars are billions of light years away, and they probably are, I wouldn't argue that. They probably go beyond what we've been able to see so far. Every time they look at a spot in space, they see more stars. I don't know how far it goes. Probably goes forever. And that blows the human mind. How can it go forever?
Well, it doesn't go forever.
You know that it doesn't go forever?
Definitely.
You've been there, done that.
Yeah.
He's a doctor of astronomy, Kent. Oh my God. Yes, he knows.
Yes, we've done
Extraterrestrial percent.
Just because you don't understand something, Kent, doesn't make it untrue.
No, we can see far enough away in astronomy that we can look back to that epoch when stars didn't even exist.
Are you telling me, and everybody and God's listening, that scientists have now observed the farthest star there is?
Yes.
man.
The exaggerated stuff, again, he's performing. And when he's performing, when he's performing, he gets to go back into his, like, standard script arguments.
Okay.
Why, Hugh? Why are you saying that? What's the
We have
evidence?
telescopes powerful enough to probe that far back in the history of the universe. In fact, one of the astronomers that volunteers for us, William Keel, at the University of Alabama, that's his research field, photographing the universe before galaxies exist, before stars exist, and showing the history of creation from that moment forward.
All right, we're
So,
going
yeah, we
to
have the
wrap this up
images.
here, and the facts we're going to come back. And there's a couple things when we come back, so please hang in there with us.
Yeah, so that's that segment. I really, really love it. It's such a contrast between Kent trying to get into his script, and you can see him with the big facial expressions where he thinks he can get back into his normal routine, versus being questioned and having to make up bullshit on the spot. And yeah, that's really, really entertaining. So let's watch the next segment.
Across the earth, across the sky, above the earth, across the sky. He made the great creatures in the sea, then the livestock, creatures that move along the ground, wild animals, and finally man. All right? First of all, start me off. Does evolution have any place in any of this?
I would say no.
Why?
Well, just by scientific modeling, we can determine that there is no possibility for a species changing into a distinctly different species unless it exceeds 1 quadrillion individuals with a body size less than 1 centimeter and a generation time less than 3 months, which means it's going to work for viruses and bacteria, but it's going to have no capacity to explain the existence of new species of birds, mammals, or any of the creatures we see from the Cambrian explosion onward.
So while I don't necessarily agree, but I also don't have sources to cite, what I like here that Dr. Ross did is cite specific criteria for when another species has become a different species, when a species has become another species. 1 quadrillion individuals, and then a couple of other things. Whenever Kent talks about this, he's just like, a dog hasn't given birth to a non-dog, or a cow hasn't given birth to a non-cow. That's not specific or measurable or realistic. I'm thinking like SMART goals in my head. Whereas Dr. Ross has given us specific measurable criterion in order to define whether or not something has evolved from one species into another. There's a whole bunch of other content out there that is really, really good on talking about evolution, and I'm not even going to try and over talk. No, that's not right. That was some good grape juice. Time for water. I'm not going to try and add to that conversation. I don't have nearly enough knowledge or exposure in that area, but I did want to point out that I like how Dr. Ross laid out what he means when he says from one species going to another.
Folks on PBS are doing specials on chaos theory, saying that that's the way it came about. What do you think?
Chaos theory, in my opinion, doesn't work. Yes, you can get departures from thermodynamic equilibrium if you got a complicated enough system and pick a small enough volume element in that system, but there's an important corollary. The farther you depart a system from thermodynamic equilibrium, the faster it must snap back. As something as complex as a virus, the snapback time is less than 10 to the minus 120 seconds. So the fact that we're all older than that means that's not how we...
Kent's just staring off into space. He's not even trying. I'm listening to Dr. Ross. I do not have the background to understand what's happening here. And I can't tell from John Ankerberg's body language whether he understands or not, but he is at least actively engaged and listening because of the nodding that's going on. Kent isn't even trying anymore. Kent's just like, I'm gonna stare off into space and think about my argument.
Got here.
So you're saying all the plants, all the animals, and man, none of that evolved?
No evolution beyond, not the species level, the genus level, order, family, none of that. Unless the species happens to have more than a quadrillion individuals, which is only a few.
Kent, you've offered $250,000 to anybody that could prove that theory. Give me some illustrations of why you think they never will.
Well, all we've ever observed is dogs produce dogs.
There it is.
Nobody's ever seen a dog come from a non-dog. Now, they might want to believe that a dog and a banana have a common ancestor. Well, I don't care what they believe, but that's not science. And I certainly resent my tax dollars going to support that.
They don't. They don't. Because he went to jail for tax fraud. And his current Dinosaur Adventureland Park is a 501c3 exemption and doesn't have to pay property tax. So no matter what, he's not paying into schools with any of his tax dollars. And at this point in time, he hadn't gone to jail yet, which means he wasn't paying into any income tax or property tax or anything like that. So
you need to get a King James, brother, by the way, because you said wild animals. The Bible doesn't say that. They weren't wild. They were all tame, all friendly animals in the original creation. They were all part of, Adam got to pet them all when he went out for a walk. And the animals were all created.
That was a swallow there. Again, he's not comfortable when he has to make up new script on the spot. And so that mouth closure, that swallow, I think that's what that was. That was not... That was discomfort, and that was buying him time to think of what he's got next.
Got to pet them all when he went out for a walk. And the animals were all created on one literal day, the sixth day. And then Adam and Eve were both made on the sixth day. It wasn't a long period of time between Adam and Eve like Dr. Ross believes. It was the same day. And
got to get the dig in.
And there's, the God that I worship is able to do it right, and he's able to do it in a few seconds.
Okay, but you're saying...
The God that I worship, again, he is separating. He is making a distinction, which is what he accused Dr. Ross of doing earlier.
Saying that God could, is there any benefit of God doing it quicker than 6 24-hour days? In other words, if that shows his power, why not do it in 2 nanoseconds and really show off? Why do you say that he couldn't have done it longer?
Oh, he
in other words,
when
a painter paints his picture,
I understand.
Okay, he can take his time.
He's trying to get John Ankerberg to stop. Oh, I just did it there. I did do it. Okay. All right. He's trying to get John Ankerberg to stop so that he can keep talking. He doesn't want to hear what John Ankerberg's got to say, because there's the chance that John Ankerberg's going to contradict him before he can even get his script out. And he at least wants to get his script out, because then his response can be, I just don't believe you.
And doing whatever he wants. He's the creator.
Right.
Is there anything better about saying he did it, over 10 billion years of age, 2 nanoseconds, or 6 24-hour days? Is there some spiritual quality that adheres to that?
Well, the only reason I can see for God taking 6 days, he could have done it in 0 time. He doesn't need any time at all, and could have made it perfect and right. And God doesn't need 17 billion years to get the stars just right to support life for this brief time period like Dr. Ross teaches in his books. My God did it right in 6 days, just like he said. We have a solar reason that we have a year. We go around the sun once a year. We have a lunar reason that we have a month. Used to be the month was about the same time as the lunar cycle. Nobody knows why we have a 7-day week. There's no, what's the historical reason? Why does every culture have a 7-day?
We talked about this in the last video, I'm pretty sure, but it's the Roman calendar. That's why we have a 7-day week, the Roman calendar, it still falls within Kent's specific timeline for the Earth, but it was established well before the King James was written, or compiled, I guess. So he's really showing his lack of knowledge in this area here.
Spiritual quality that adheres to that.
Well, the only reason I can see for God taking 6 days, he could have done it in 0 time. He doesn't need any time at all, and could have made it perfect and right. And God doesn't need 17 billion years to get the stars just right to support life for this brief time period like Dr. Ross teaches in his books. My God did it right in 6.
I think that was supposed to be a dig, but it doesn't land because that's probably what the majority of the audience believes as well. So it's not really a dig. It's only a dig if you think the Earth is only 6,000 years old.
6 days, just like you said. We have a solar reason that we have a year. You know, we go around the sun once a year. We have a lunar reason that we have a month. You know, it used to be the month was about the same time as the lunar cycle. Nobody knows why we have a 7-day week. There's no, what's the historical reason? Why does every culture have a 7-day week? Napoleon tried to change it to a 10-day week, and it was disaster. We're just kind of built with our biological clock to work 6 days and rest 1. And it's normal days. God wasn't telling the Jews to work 6 million years and then rest, or work 6,000 years and then rest.
He told them to work the agricultural land 6 years, though.
Yeah, I think the 7-day week is established because of the creation. And the biological clock is just a normal, God just did it that way just so we'd have, and I also think that God...
He doesn't finish that thought. God created it that way so we'd have. Where's the rest of that thought? Have what? I'm going to kick back a few seconds.
Nobody knows why we have a 7-day week. There's no, what's the historical reason? Why does every culture have a 7-day week? Napoleon tried to change it to a 10-day week, and it was disaster. We're just kind of built with our biological clock to work 6 days and rest 1. And it's normal days. God wasn't telling the Jews to work 6 million years and then rest, or work 6,000 years and then rest.
He told them to work the agricultural land 6 years, though.
Yeah, I think the 7-day week is established because of the creation. And the biological clock is just a normal, God just did it that way just so we'd have, and I also think that God created, it says in Genesis 1 that...
That is 3 unfinished sentences in a row. 3 in a row, because he was like, because of the creation, God did that so we would have, and then in creation, blah, blah. Like, oh my God.
A week is established because of the creation. And the biological clock is just a normal, God just did it that way just so we'd have, and I also think that God created, it says in Genesis 1 that God said, let us make man in our image. The very next verse says, so God created man. Here you've got an example where created and made means the same thing.
I don't think so. I think
that wasn't the point being made at all. That wasn't the argument at all. The argument was whether or not evolution is possible here.
Making is referring to the fact that we have a physical component to us, which previously existed.
Wait, previously existed. Do you believe Adam was literally made from dust and God breathed into his nostrils?
Definitely.
And Eve was literally made from a rib?
No, it's side of Adam. It doesn't say rib in the text. It says a portion of Adam's side. So we don't really know what kind of biopsy God took out of Adam.
But you believe this literally took place?
Yes.
Well, we finally agree on something. There's one.
Okay.
So we believe that God made Adam. Now let's what are the tip-offs of when? We also have bipedal hominids going around, it seems, from anthropologists that go back past what the Bible says in terms of the genealogies that are given.
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about that. How far back do you think the genealogies take us in Genesis? Usher said it was 4,000 years BC.
Right. Well, the Hebrew scholars I talked to said there's obvious gaps in the genealogies. You can't fix a precise date like Archbishop Usher did to assume no gaps.
But there's also a
limit. There's a limit. Yeah, I would be hard-pressed to push it any earlier than, say, 50, 60,000 years. Mm-hmm. I got friends who try to push it back as far as 100,000. Anything beyond that, I think, is illegitimate.
So
this is just the genealogy of the Bible that they're talking about. Dr. Ross has already stated multiple times that he thinks the Earth and the universe are hundreds of millions of years, if not billions of years old at this point. So he's just talking about the genealogy of the people in the Bible, in Genesis specifically.
The fact is that both you and Kent are in trouble as far as the anthropologists who want to take some of these other bipedal primates or hominids back to, what was a million years?
Yeah, if you interpret the bipedals as human, then you've got a problem.
All right, so what do you guys do with them?
They're not human.
Why aren't they human?
They're just like the primates. They're like the chimpanzees, orangutans, gorillas.
You include Neanderthals as being in this category?
They're in that category too.
See, I disagree.
Why?
The Neanderthals were deformed humans, probably post-flood. They were burying people after they died. If a person lives past 100 years, there's a disease called acromegaly where the pituitary gland keeps secreting growth hormones. Your ears get longer, your nose gets bigger, and your bones in your forehead get thicker. The Neanderthals were simply post-flood humans who were deformed from diseases, arthritis, rickets.
Kent, are you aware that they have enormous nasal capacities and that their DNA is radically different from human DNA?
Well, now that's deceitful to say it's radically different. It's about 4% different, and it's within the range
That's
of humans
huge.
today. You could go downtown Los Angeles and line up people and make an exact same chart like they've got in your textbook, with the skulls sloping, different diseases, and noses larger, nasal capacity.
Dr. Ross didn't cite any textbook at all. Kent is still trying to go back to his old arguments here. I want to say we may have more DNA in common with orangutans than we do with Neanderthals. I'll put some information somewhere on the screen whether or not that's the case. But like Dr. Ross said, 4%. I want to say we're closer to apes that are alive today than Neanderthals.
Is larger.
No.
They're still human.
No. Okay, you can read a paper. I got the paper here. It's by Ian Tattersall and Jeffrey Schwartz. And they examined 13 Neanderthal skulls, complete skulls, and discovered that the nasal capacity was so enormous
They could
it
smell
eliminated
fine.
it eliminated the possibility that Neanderthal was biologically linked to any other land mammal species, not just primates. They said, we got a problem here.
I don't know what paper he's citing. I like how Kent was trying to get to the end of that. They can smell fine and keep going, but Dr. Ross just didn't have it, didn't acknowledge it, just kept going.
Got this Neanderthal that we can't link with anything.
You're saying just because their nose is bigger, they're not linked to...
Not nose, nasal capacity. That's inside. This is your nose. Your nasal stuff is inside.
anything.
It's not the nose, it's the entire nasal capacity.
Sure.
They have a nasal capacity is so huge, there's really no, and these guys are atheists. They're saying, now, how can we possibly evolve this gigantic nasal capacity from any other species we see in the fossil record or any other species we see on Earth? And they said, we can't come up
I would
with
agree.
it.
Nothing evolves beyond, I wouldn't use the word species. That's kind of a nebulous term, because a dog and a wolf...
He's not wrong, but I hate that he's not wrong. Species is not an actual, like, it doesn't have specific things that say, you know, this is what makes a species versus this was what makes the genus. It's an older term that isn't being used as much anymore in the scientific community because they are trying to get more accurate in describing organisms. But I hate that he's right about it.
Wolf and a coyote are different species, but they're still interfertile. They're the same kind. I'd stick with what the Bible says. The animals bring forth after their kind. A horse and a
How do you
zebra.
interpret kind? Do you think horses and zebras evolved
I think
from one
horses
another?
and zebras are the same kind. I interpret kind like the Bible says. They're able to bring forth. The ones that were originally able to reproduce are the created kinds. Now, there's been variations from there.
So how far up do you put the kinds? I mean, I just don't know what your
I don't know that
position
anybody
is.
knows that, and that would be a good field of research for science to get into.
They are. You just don't want to listen, Kent.
Would you be willing to take it past genera?
I think with some areas, now see, what we have here is we're trying to take a modern 20th century classification system, you know, started with Carolus Linnaeus, has been refined many times, and we're trying to force that onto the Bible. Now, that's the mistake. The Bible says they bring forth after their kind. A horse and a zebra probably are the original created kind. One of the zoos in...
So he's okay
No.
with there being nuance and context when it supports his argument, but not when it contradicts his argument. Because here he's saying, no, we need to have a little bit, he's not literally saying it, but he's implying that there needs to be more nuance here. We can't apply 20th century thinking to the Bible because that's not how it was written. But any other time that anybody wants to look at the context, especially of when the Bible was written, no, it's literal. It's literal.
I believe it was one in Hawaii. They had a whalpin. They crossed a killer whale and a dolphin. Many zoos have had a tigon or a liger cross a
I'm going to Google that. Cross a killer whale and dolphin. Did that happen? A whalphin, extremely rare cetacean hybrid born from mating a female bottlenose dolphin and a male false killer whale. Interesting. So not even an orca. So taxonomically, they're both within the oceanic dolphin family. I mean, technically, orca whales are considered dolphins, but specifically the false killer whale, which is not as large as the orca. This one, the first one in 1981 died after 200 days. So it didn't even live that long. The longest living one looks like it lived for 9 years, which is not very long as far as cetaceans go. So the whalpins did live, but not for very long and not without serious human interventions. Let's go back a few seconds.
Cross a tiger and a lion. They probably are the original created kind.
Yes, but they can't reproduce that kind.
Well, the whalpin, the whalpin did. After 10 years, it produced a baby.
I don't think that's true. Let's see. The first whalpin to survive was Kikamalu in Hawaii. Kikamalu had 3 calves total, sired by a male bottlenose. So she didn't actually interbreed with any other whalpins. So that is misleading from Kent at best. That's interesting. So it did live, but it was mostly bottlenose dolphin, which is probably why it lived.
Maybe.
But not the liger.
I don't know about the liger. See,
Yeah.
but even if they get where they
Or a
can't
mule.
reproduce, one in
But you
20,000
guys
mules is
you're arguing
able.
intramurally, and the big argument is from the outside. Does the fossil record support the evolutionists or not?
I never
Plants,
got,
animals, man.
yeah, I never got a chance to respond to the caveman, I don't think, but
Well, I mean,
You had your chance. You've been talking for minutes about whalpins. I mean, I went into that too, but you had your chance and you just didn't. And now you're mad because you got interrupted. And that is the question at hand. Also, Kent doesn't like the fossil record.
let's stick with the outside world here for a moment.
Okay.
And the fact is, those folks out there are simply saying, both you guys are wrong. The fact is, evolution did take place. But I think most of our students recognize that even people like Gould at Harvard are making a shift here. Punctuated equilibrium is really going against what they originally started out with. All of a sudden, it just appears in the record. What comment on this, please?
Well, it's an excellent point, because what Gould and Niles Eldredge are trying to do is make evolution work where the mathematics tells us it is the lowest possible probability. I mean, when the species population drops down to a few thousand, you get a 0 probability of evolutionary advance. When you look at the fossil record, where do you see?
Yeah, I saw this in another video where you need like the rule of 5, where like in order to just continue the population, you need 50 members to get. But that's where there's like 0 monogamy. Everybody mates with everybody else. If you need, and then 500 members means that like you still have to watch out for like interbreeding. Monogamy might be an option, and then 5,000 members, you have a greater chance of genetic diversity and not having to watch out for like first cousins and marrying siblings and stuff like that, I think.
The evidence for the so-called transitional forms. There's creatures like whales and horses, and these are creatures with population levels so small, generation time so long, body size is so huge, they have a 0 probability for evolutionary advance. They're even lower than our probability for evolutionary advance. Yet we see all these transitions. My explanation for that, God loves horses and whales. He knows because of their huge size and small populations, they're going to go extinct rapidly. When they do, he makes new ones.
When you guys are on campus...
Also, I can't speak in terms of horses, but I can for cetaceans. The small populations that we have today are a direct result of humans hunting them to near extinction. Prior to humans hunting them, there were a lot more, and the populations were huge.
What do you say to the kids that have grown up thinking that evolution is proven by the fossil record? What are the things that you use?
Give them a mathematical model. I mean, one of the things we're trying to do in university campuses...
I'm not a kid. I'm not a child. I don't want a mathematical model. Don't make me do math, please.
...is say, if you're going to work in this discipline, you have to integrate mathematics with biology.
That's fair. That's why I'm not a biologist.
Here's the principle. Most mutations, or many more mutations, are negative than those that are beneficial. The best you get is a ratio of 10,000 to 1. In other words, mutations will tend to drive a species to extinction before it has an opportunity to naturally evolve, unless it has a truly enormous population size, more than a quadrillion, a body size less than 1 centimeter, and a generation time briefer than 3 months. Now you can go to the field biologists. Where do you see speciation going on in the real world? They only see it for those species.
So this is where I'm going to be in disagreement with Dr. Ross, because there are a lot of evolutionary biologists who talk about this, and so I'm not even going to try, but I will say, and also this is the early aughts. So we've had more information in the last 20 years as well. So Dr. Ross may have a different position now than he did back then. But there is evidence for speciation now in things like there's like, I think he's referring specifically to things like bacteria that we can study in a lab more readily. But I mean, we do have evidence for speciation. We do have more gaps filled in from the fossil records since then. So a lot of the, like, his stance may be representative of the time. It's definitely, we've had more information come to light now, is basically my point.
That match the mathematical limits. Those that don't, all they see are extinctions.
Right. And you've got some great illustrations on DNA too, Kent, in terms of people say, well, the DNA is similar between this and that, therefore they call that the transitional forms. But talk to that a little bit.
Well, he mentioned about God loves horses and whales, so when they go extinct, God creates new ones.
One, that is not what Dr. Ross said. So if Kent wants to get on people, like if he wants people to not put words in his mouth, he shouldn't do it himself either. That's another example of him telling on himself. Back over here, we've got a few minutes left of this segment.
This is the type of thing that makes me so nervous about people following his teachings, because there are so many things like this thrown in there that just are simply unsupported by Scripture.
Psalm 104.
The Bible says God finished his creation. He was finished. I don't think God's creating new species all the time.
I don't think it's... He said Dr. Ross, following Dr. Ross's teaching. Like, I don't... Dr. Ross is an astronomer. He's not a preacher, is he? Is he? Let me Google this. Sorry for all of the Googling. But I really I need to know. Dr. Hugh Ross... So he does have a ministry, which makes sense for the use of teaching. All right. I guess that's fair.
I think it was done. And when he looked at it, it was very good.
By the way, I agree. God has stopped creating new species when he created Eve. That's when he went into his period of rest.
And how long ago was that?
I would argue that it's probably in the neighborhood of 30 to 40,000 years ago.
Okay, we could argue that for a long time, but I think it was 6,000 years ago, just like the Bible obviously teaches.
But you're both using genealogies to say there's an end in terms of the parameters. So you're both basically on the same point at that spot that God stopped. So you're saying that this origination of new whales, new horses, and so on was before that.
It was before that, correct.
Okay.
Just like Psalm 104 speaks.
But come back, please, because we only got about 2 minutes here, and that's this thing of the DNA. Because the kids hear this a whole lot.
Kent didn't even touch the DNA. Kent was just like, no, I'm going to talk about what's dangerous about what Dr. Ross is teaching.
In terms of there's similarity in DNA, so therefore a man is similar to this, that, and the other. And they use that as kind of a transitional deal.
The reason DNA is similar in so many different animals is we all have the same designer. Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint have millions of similarities. That doesn't prove they both evolved from Morse code. The same guys are writing the programs, that's all. And the same God designed the DNA of all the animals.
Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint are not living organisms that can interbreed.
And the DNA is incredibly flexible. There's a wide range of humans. There's a wide range of dogs. You get Great Danes and Chihuahuas, and they probably had a common ancestor. It was a dog. That doesn't prove a dog and a banana are related. So the DNA code is just so incredible. It must be an incredibly smart designer.
Take a moment. Can you remember some of the numbers on some things that just show the dissimilarity? There's no transitional forms going up. John
Ankerberg is basically asking Kent for evidence, what's your opinion?
Oh, yeah, I've got a chart on my website, drdino.com. People can look at, penicillin only has 2 chromosomes. So that must have evolved first, and then fruit flies have 8. So they must be the next form, Now, a housefly and a tomato both have 12 chromosomes. So obviously they're identical twins. I mean, it's hard to tell the difference between
That's not the argument that anybody is making.
a housefly and a tomato, A possum, a redwood tree, and a kidney bean all have 22 chromosomes. Identical triplets, Possum, redwood tree, kidney bean. Average scientist can't tell them apart, they're
He laughed at his own joke because nobody else did. He's prompting for a laugh there, and it didn't happen. Also, I did it again. I do it, apparently. Anyway, Forrest Valkai has a fantastic video called Sex and Sensibility that talks about biological sex, which is kind of a nebulous term, to use Kent's wording, anyways, and chromosomes and all of that. So an evolutionary biologist with degrees who's working on his master's or PhD, I forget. He's got a lot of credentials that are valid and really good. He's got a fantastic video. I will link it in the description below, where he talks about the different chromosomes and gametes and all of that other stuff. He goes into really good detail and explains it at a really understandable level.
Monkeys or chimpanzees have more chromosomes than we do. Man has 46, tobacco has 48. So if we keep evolving, we're all going to be a tobacco plant.
No one is making that claim.
I mean, the whole idea is absurd, and how they believe this, I don't know.
Nobody believes that. The only thing that's absurd is the representation that Kent is making. And the way that he is, well, I should say misrepresenting. His misrepresentation is what's absurd.
But they just don't like the idea that God created the world.
Okay.
It's obvious he did.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about what happened when Adam sinned. Was there death in the world before Adam sinned? And did the law of entropy only take place when Adam sinned, or was it in place before that? All right, because it has a bearing on whether God created in 24 hours or God created over long periods of time. So stick with us. We'll take a break. We'll be right back.
So that'll be our next video. And I really like this format and this particular debate because he's on his own ground in terms of creationist and faith levels. So he can't make, like you saw the smug smile again when he's talking about evolution. That's really where his lane is. That's his comfort zone, is debating evolution. And because Dr. Ross doesn't believe it either, it doesn't accept it as a scientific theory either. Like he really just can't sink his heels in to where he normally gets to dig his heels in and just spout off all of his different, ramblings on things. So I love seeing him uncomfortable because he's getting questioned on things in ways that he doesn't normally get questioned on, especially in his other lecture series. He's just lecturing. He's not being told to stay on topic, though he really should. We saw in the spanking video how he goes on unrelated stories. But yeah, so he doesn't like being told to stay on track. He doesn't like being told to keep focus. He doesn't like when people quote scripture back at him because he doesn't have an answer for that. He's not pre-prepared for that. So that's really fun for me to watch. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll join me again for the next one. I'm still obviously getting used to this whole format and things, so I don't really have like a sign-off phrase or anything. Anyways, yeah. I hope you're enjoying this. I for what it's worth, I'm enjoying reacting to it. I don't necessarily enjoy like the pre-work that comes along with selecting clips. So if anybody wants to suggest stuff, that'd be great. I think that's just, I don't have the bandwidth to sift through tons and tons of Hovind material to try and decide what to do next. So Yep, there's that. Anyway, have a good rest of your day, evening, night, whatever it is. And please, please just be kind humans. Bye.